Let's do a quick review for Like a Dragon. I'm going to talk for like 5 minutes about it. This game is almost treated like a standalone game. You start in an area of Japan with a new character, which is Ichi, who's introduced in this game. And although you will benefit from some Easter eggs and references from the other Yakuza games, like some very staple characters from the franchise, you can definitely play this game without having played any of the other ones. So this was my second Yakuza game, and it was actually very good. It was very polished. The stuff that I liked about this game, just like Yakuza 0, is first and foremost the story of the game is fantastic. I'll talk about the ending and stuff in a little minute, but for the most part, this is a game that is very cinematic. So if you feel like you're maybe not got enough time to sit through some of the cutscenes or whatever, just a heads up about that. The game is very cutscene heavy. The characters in the cutscenes and the story that runs through the cutscenes and all the voice acting is all really, really well put together. I think that some of the writing between the characters in this game is really, really modernized and top tier. The character of Ichi is very likable. He's quite lovable from the beginning, but all the other characters that come in are quite exciting, and they fit around quite a complex plot. There's moments where a character that you really like will end up dead, and then suddenly you're like, holy shit, that's a thing. All of the scenes where people are talking for long periods of time, the way the cameras are shot and set up, and the animations and the facial expressions, and the music that ties in on top of it is really good. It's really good, and there's a lot of JRPGs out there that, although they might have fun gameplay or fun elements, sometimes the story can be lackluster, and in this game the story was pretty good. There was a couple of moments where I feel like you really have to suspend your disbelief. There's a couple of moments of cheese, and there's a very, for me, rather excruciating ending between two of the characters, mostly Ichi and the young master, and that goes on for a bit longer than I think was necessary. But again, that is Ichi's character. He's very empathetic, he's very kind, he's very loving, almost to the point of his own downfall, but it is just who he is, and that's totally fine. There's a couple of moments where things happen and it's a little bit unbelievable. I think the whole point about the two babies in the locker at the same time, one of which gets hypothermia and then put in a wheelchair for 20 years of his life, meanwhile the other baby, Ichi, is absolutely fine. The fact that there's two babies in the locker to begin with is a bit ridiculous. There's a lot of stuff that, although it is a video game and it is a fiction and it is, it's a dramatized story for the sake of enjoyment, sometimes I thought to myself, the story in these games are complex. The story is it's often believable, although it is drama, it is believable, but there's a couple of moments in this game where I was like, At the end of the day, it was still good, and I would still recommend it. The combat itself was actually quite fun as well. Obviously, this game goes to a kind of RPG turn-based sequence, which I'm a bit of a sucker for. This game plays almost kind of like, I guess, certain games like Persona. Obviously, Dragon Quest is referenced to a bunch, and Ichi loves Dragon Quest and all that stuff, which I also enjoy, so that was kind of fun to see that for sure. All of the skills that you get on your characters are very smooth. The animations are absolutely incredible for this game. I will say, in terms of the combat, and similarly to Yakuza 0 when we played it, sometimes this game does suffer from bloat. There is excessive fights with random NPCs in between the important fights, and I know that's kind of what the game is, all the Yakuza games, from what I gather, are tons and tons of fighting and punching and violence. That's what the whole branding of the genre is about, right? Or the franchise is about, and I totally get that, but there are definitely times where they could have trimmed some of the fights out of this game. That's just my take. Obviously, some people might love it, some people might settle in. If you're playing this game over many weeks, or maybe even a couple of months, then you might not notice it, but we certainly noticed it playing it on stream over the course of like a week or so. The only other thing I will say is when you're traveling around inside the city as well, when you're not using the taxis because you maybe haven't found the taxis in specific areas yet, I find it kind of annoying when you're trying to get from A to B between sub-stories. If you're doing a sub-story, it's never the case of you start the sub-story, you go around the corner, you do the next part, and then the next part, and then you start back where you were. It's always like you start on the east side of the city, and then the sub-story will send you to the west side of the city, then it'll send you back to the east side, then all the way back to the west, and you're constantly jumping all over the place. Now, the taxis do make that okay, but the annoying thing about the taxis is the taxis don't register for quick travel until you actually click on them. The other stuff in the game that you can do, all the side quests, are obviously full of flavour if you choose to pursue them. I think some of those little side quests, we didn't do all of them. We did a couple, and the ones we did always felt like they were quite interesting. They were quite funny. Sometimes they were quite poignant, and although a lot of them were jokes and memes, like giant Yakuza patriarchs wearing diapers and pretending to be babies, or it would be a romance between a homeless person who loved a woman who wasn't homeless, or about a businessman who is finding time to make time for his family. Some of it is funny and jokey, but then some of it is actually like life lessons. There's the girl, we did the quest with the granny who Back in her day, she was a star track and field monster, and now she's an old lady and she can't cross the road. And I thought some of these moments were actually quite touching, and I really liked that aspect of the game. It does give it a more depth than you think. The business minigame is something we spent a lot of time doing. We actually didn't get to the end of that side quest, but we did get very far. We got to like the top 20 shareholder pricing, I think. The menus and how the game runs, we played on PC. Solid 60 FPS the whole time. The menus and the UI, all this stuff here is extremely clean, which I really liked. It ran really smoothly for me. We never had a single crash. The audio balance, I will just say, the music in this game is really quite spectacular. I say that a lot for these JRPGs. Music is really good, and I've found myself over the last few days downloading some of the songs from Spotify. The audio balance in this game is a bit weird at times, because if you go into the settings, this is a tiny minor gripe that not a lot of people will bother about, but for some reason, I think Yakuza 0 was the same. You've got your music slider, and you've got your voices and cutscenes. However, a lot of the gameplay aspects when the characters are talking, it's not the scenes that aren't actually a cutscene. When the characters are talking to each other, they are actually the audio of the voices comes through the sound effects slider, which is really weird, because when I was playing this game on stream, whenever you're bashing someone's head in with a dustpan or a bicycle or some crazy fights going on, I wanted my sound effect volume to be quite low, because the explosions and the animations and all the characters fighting, it gets quite noisy. But then what I found is when I would go into the cutscenes with the characters speaking, the voice audio was not coming through the voices tab. This is actually for when your characters are speaking to each other on the sidewalk. You know, when you run around the town and they chat shit to each other, that's what the voices slider is. And this cutscene slider is only ever implemented when there is a main cutscene, which is not very often. You know, these important cutscenes where something really serious happens, that's your cutscene volume. So all the other audio of the characters talking, it comes through the sound effects volume slider, which is just must be the way they manufacture and operate or create the game. But that was a bit awkward at times for me. Again, not a lot of people will give a shit about that if they're just playing it on their couch, but it's something I don't know why it's like that. It's kind of frustrating at times. There's a lot of like Ichi following the young master and begging him to come back, and although I know that is Ichi's character, again, there's like a Naruto-Sasuke dynamic where Sasuke wants to leave the village for power and Naruto is obsessed with loving him and getting him to come back, and there is that dynamic happens between Ichi and the young master, and it got a bit old for me towards the end, if I'm being honest. Although I loved the story, the ending for me was just a bit painful when Ichi is literally 40 minutes in a row begging him in different scenes, different scenarios, and I don't know, it just felt like a bit much, honestly. But again, I did love Ichi as a character. It was just sometimes I felt like that went on for a bit too long. Yakuza Like a Dragon, on the whole, pretty good game. Will we be playing more Yakuza games if they come out in this kind of, maybe as a sequel, or even in this kind of realm where it's turn-based again? Of course we will. Yeah, absolutely. The story, almost on its own, warrants people who love Japan or RPGs in general, even just comedy RPGs or modern RPGs. I think it's worth giving a go. But again, we'll be excited for that when the day comes. But for the time being, yeah, happy to put this one on the shelf and give it a thumbs up. And if anybody asks us about it, we'll definitely recommend. So